Welcome to Tales from the Trenches Tuesdays. Today it is my absolute pleasure to have Jim Langley on. Jim is the president of Langley Innovations, and he's pioneered a number of practices that have been emulated by hundreds of institutions of higher learning. The knowledge he acquired from conceiving and conducting 3 path-breaking campaigns at 3 major institutions, and the insight he gleaned from decades of research on donor behavior has been shared in 5 books, dozens of articles, hundreds of blog posts, and scores of seminars, workshops, and speeches. As Vice President for Advancement at Georgetown University, Jim imagined and led a massive discovery initiative, conducting face-to-face interviews of alumni around the world. The purpose of the interviews was to discover what Jim calls the animating passions of the alumni, then link those passions with the university's programmatic initiatives to establish Georgetown as the place that alumni not only give to, but through, to realize their larger societal ideals. Renowned for his public speaking, Jim's professional seminars are consistently described as the best I've ever attended by his peers, and he's been awarded the Crystal Apple by the Council for the advancement and support of education for having received the highest possible evaluations from attendees at 10 different conferences. So welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Jack. Glad to be with you.
You know, it kind of, one of your articles you had said kind of elicit more, solicit less, right? So,
Yeah.
I always say, if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money. It's kind of the same thing.
That's right.
And you address some of the causes of fundraisers' fear of asking. I actually think that a lot of them, it's not a fear, it's a genuine disdain for asking. They don't like asking. And you've stated, if bosses and say that a significant portion of their fundraisers are afraid to ask, you wonder if it isn't a sign that the fundraisers are afraid to tell the bosses what isn't working.
Yes.
But I might respectfully push back and share that many fundraisers have a genuine fear of failure. Right. So direct mail has a 3% success. If you get 3% with direct mail, you're doing amazing. There's nowhere else in the world that 3% is a good number. But, looking at someone in the eyes and asking them for a gift is a totally different approach. So, I see people fall into direct mail is easy because there's nothing someone says no, it doesn't really bother me. It's no skin off my teeth. But if you're asking someone for $25,000 and you're sitting across the table from them, that you're exposing yourself, right?
Yes. Yes. I think it's a very legitimate point, but then that makes me wonder why we're not helping them separate that personal feeling from what I would say is the professional situation. So for instance, Jack, if let's say I was visiting you in Ottawa and, I invite you out to lunch, and I realize I forgot my wallet, I would find it so hard to say, Jack, could you give me $5 so I can get the, some way home, take the subway home or whatever the means of transportation there. I would find that to this day, at this age, brutally difficult to just ask you for that money. But I have looked people in the eye and asked for as much as $110 million in one gift. But because it wasn't Jim Langley asking for himself, it was Jim Langley in his professional capacity asking for a project in which he deeply believed and knew that the organization could convert to a greater good.
Right.
So I greatly respect your point because it's psychologically true that the fear of failure is one of the great fears of humanity that we have to deal with. But then I'll put that at the door of our training to say, you are not asking for yourself. Mm-hmm. Whether a person says yes or no has nothing to do with you, but we want to have a process that we share with you to ensure everything you do up to that point is sound, a checklist, so that when you ask whether the answer is yes or no, like I shared earlier with my most difficult canvas, you can say, yeah, I did my job, I did my role, I met these criteria and it didn't work out.
Right.
That's where I think we have fallen is we hire people who may be bluffing a little bit, pretending to be what we want them to be, and this
Right.
happens in jobs all the time. Then they get out there and they do have that personal fear, and so it's just a lost opportunity that we didn't have the conversation that you and I are now having right now. So of course you'll be afraid.
Yeah.
But this is how you overcome that fear is to take your personality out of it and to make yourself representative. Now, that does mean you have to convince yourself that you believe in that organization, that you believe in its efficacy, that you believe in the project. So that's where I'll also say to young fundraisers, don't get into organizations where you don't believe in those things,
Right.
because you'll feel like your guts are being ripped out,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you're selling you're selling your soul.
Most definitely. And, it's interesting. I find that sometimes boards and bosses hire these rainmakers because they don't want to actually go and do the work themselves, right? So they're like,
Right.
okay, we'll hire, the hired gun to come and do it. And I think a lot of it,
Never
I don't
works.
think it's out of malice. I think there's fundraising, people just don't understand it, right? So
Yes.
they
Yes.
don't put the appropriate resources behind it and wonder why
Yes.
there's kind of that spin all
That's
the
it.
time.
That's it. Oh, they'll take a new fundraiser. They want to automate these things. Here's your brochure.
Right.
Go meet with this person in 1, 2, 3 visits you have to ask. They've
Yes.
got it on kind of a schedule. You and I know it doesn't quite work on a schedule, and a good fundraiser will sort of wait until the person has achieved enough comfort to be receptive to an ask.
Yes. Yeah. And the issues that you have a budget to meet and your year end is coming up makes no
Yeah.
difference in the world to the donor.
None.
It's interesting. I
None.
wrote a blog many years ago that I was really ticked off about the emails I got in December, where everyone tells you, December 31st, that's the cutoff. I know when the end of the year is. Like, are you telling me you won't accept a donation January 1st?
Right, right.
It's just silly.
Totally artificial.
Right.
Totally artificial. And this, you're seeing this now with Giving Days. People get upset with me, but they don't rake in as much as we think they do. They're less than 2% of total giving, right? But just look at LinkedIn when people are announcing their Giving Days. It's that time again.
Right.
Now, how did we lose sight of a donor? It's your time, and you're declaring it a giving day. How is it my giving day? How is it motivating to me? What's happening today that is going to cause me to go, oh, I really must do that? It's
Most
all that
definitely.
does is sort of harvest the loyalty that's already built into an organization. And that's why you also have high rates of turnover. So they have these kind of peer models that bring in other donors, but they zip right back out.
Right.
And still, the most, to the extent that people are in the habit of giving year end because it's their tax cycle, it's their
Sure.
planning cycle, that's productive. But it's not when the decision is being made, Jack, that you've got the whole year to influence the decision,
100%.
right? And use that year knowing you've got donors who always come in the last week of December,
Right.
always use the intervening 51 weeks
Right.
to show them impact and difference making and make them feel good about the decision they're going to make.
Well, I contend that the majority of gifts that are on Giving Tuesday or whatever it is
Yeah,
are already, the donor's already decided. They're just, kind of fulfilling their pledge that day.
no doubt. It's nothing about the day.
Right.
It's just the time. We're now harvesting. It's that time.
Yeah.
So they pony up. It's just we see it's these things that have proven delusional to the field. So we'll just have more giving days. So we'll
Right.
engage in more hoopla. We'll
Yeah.
get a branding exercise to come.
Yes. Or we'll do the ice bucket challenge, right? So,
Ah, ah,
yeah. Yeah.
right. Ah. But where is the substance that will sustain that passion for your mission?
Yeah. So, what I have found really interesting when I've interviewed different guests is I asked them a question about how philanthropy was spoken about around their dinner table when they grew up. And I've had such a wide variety of responses. So, I'm just wondering, Jim, growing up, how was philanthropy spoken about at the Langley dinner table?
Yeah, I have thought about this because, I keep trying to trace these things back to where it all begins to understand the roots of philanthropy. So we were regular churchgoers. My father would always put money in an offering basket, and I know he would always write a check, but he'd grumble about it. He wasn't always happy about it.
Mm,
So I can't say that that was it, but there was this example of maybe obligation being fulfilled, which is not a high philanthropic motivator.
right.
My mother had a very benevolent attitude in general, so she was just generous in her interpretation of people. She was well ahead of her time and being accepting of differences. She was the daughter of a minister, so she just had a very benevolent attitude toward humanity. For instance, I remember one time being on a bus and there was this man that was so lined and wise, and he looked like his face was like just deeply creased. And I looked over him and I kind of shrunk back, and she caught me and she said, Jimmy, what she used to call me, she said, that's character. That's a hard life. That's somebody who's, led a hard life and
Right. Right.
deep life. And, look at that as wisdom, look at that as character. So she was so benevolent. I think that influenced me. But so I go I'm in the army at age 20, and I give 10% of my income to the United Way.
Wow.
And I keep asking myself, what caused me to do that? What caused me to do that? And I can't. And people looked at me and said, "Why are you giving so much? I'm making $350 a month, and I'm giving 30." I thought, well, I don't need the 35. I
Right.
don't know. They're already right. I'm already that way. So I wish I knew, and that's one of those things: is what messages crept into my brain that when I was given the opportunity to contribute, I did simply because I felt it was the right thing to do, and
But surely to
I'm a part of
goodness,
society,
United Way
right? I'm a
didn't
part
ask you for a gift when you were just in the army. You had proactively decided to tithe through
just
them.
handed out a form for the United Way.
Oh, they
Everybody
did.
got one. Yeah, just blanketed the barracks with forms, and
Wow.
and then people looked at me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm giving."
Wow.
Well, I don't know, but I don't know. But there were. I'm trying to think about teachers. I try to think about messages in popular culture. And then you just wonder sometimes, Jack, how much genetics have to do with it. Was I already wired? Did I come into the world? I don't know. I wish I knew the answer to that. And I'd love to hear some of those other stories about what people think influenced them to become philanthropic. I think it was my mother's attitude more than anything else.
Yeah.
We're
And,
all,
so
we
much
are
of
all,
what we go
yeah,
ahead.
that's it. We're just a part of all humanity is one. We are all one. And an individual is just a larger part of humanity.
Yeah. And, so much of what we do today is based on, our experiences growing up as kids. And you don't realize those experiences till, 20, 30, 40,
Yeah.
all those
Right.
years later. And you're like, oh, wow,
Right.
that kind of
Right.
sticks with me. I've had
Right.
guests that say philanthropy was never spoken about at the table.
Yes.
That they didn't, or someone who actually was a recipient, had to use a food bank or had to use a
Yes.
service and couldn't
Yes.
afford to pay. So, it's kind of gone both ways. So it's
Yes.
always interesting to kind of see people's perspectives and where they come
Yes.
from.
Truly.
Yeah.
Truly. Yeah. No, I think that's a wonderful line of questioning. And our field needs to understand so that we can nurture wherever that comes from. Can we nurture that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was part of the 2164 group, which is Andrea and Charles Bronfman Foundation. So they talk about folks and that intergenerational transfer of wealth. And that's one of the questions they ask is, how is philanthropy spoken around the dinner table? And that's a great conversation starter.
Oh, I love to see that when you're brought into families. When I was a frontline fundraiser, when you were brought into the family, particularly when the parents were making a commitment and brought their children in. I I thought that was just wonderful.
Yes, yes, yes. As a matter of fact, I think that, I think about some of the bigger canvases I've done. I always made sure the family was on board, right? And
Yes.
part of it.
Yes.
It's a good idea.
If at all possible, it really is.
Most definitely. Most definitely.
And, for the children to see the joy that the parents get from it, it's not at their expense, but to see that not only the obligation the parents feel, but the joy they get from doing this, I think is very important.
Most definitely. Well, Jim, this has been absolutely a great chat. Thank you so much for joining. If folks
pleasure,
wanted
Jack.
to get hold of you, how would they go about doing that?
You can reach me just at my email, jim@langleyinnovations.com. And I also welcome anybody on LinkedIn. I post regularly, as you know, Jack, and think of myself as a conversation starter. Try to raise interesting questions and make provocative points. So I'd welcome anybody joining that dialogue.
Amazing. Those are such great little nuggets that you put. They aren't, these 25-page missives that you have to read. They're easily digestible, and you scratch your head and you're going, they're totally logical.
Right. Good. Coming from you, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Jim.
My pleasure, Jack. Thank you so much.
Hi, folks. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button right here.